Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Deku become a magician part 4. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. I already had this discussion with Itsuka-chan and Momo-chan, him being here is good for him, and I really think it will help him change his ways for the better, so don't go reporting his and my past to the teachers, unless he goes back to bullying people. He's just brash, not a villain. As a white-furred paw presses a button to turn off the microphone, the other raises up a cup of tea. Well, I tend to not condone bullying, what Mr. Midoriya said is very intriguing. As he swivels his plush leather chair and hops down onto the floor of his office. I wonder how much the other teachers know. The mouse bear pondered, and I thought just changing the curriculum would be the biggest surprise. He chuckled to himself, that shows me for underestimating the current generation. No, this is just the beginning. The next morning, as the students began to file into their homeroom, they knew what today was, it was the first day for utility training. Most of them were confused and excited to see what that meant. Many of them formed little discussion groups to speculate on what that could possibly be. The students who were admitted from that course explained that they had to demonstrate how versatile their quirk could be, or that it could be used in a way beyond combat or rescue that could be deemed heroic. When Momo started to pull various objects from using her quirk, such as bandages, radio, and other useful items, it made sense. Not every hero is going to be like All Might or Recovery Girl. This led to them trying to come up with ideas of how to use their quirk in a different way than they had. However, some of the students had taken notice of the current top performer in their class, who demonstrated incredible versatility, clever thinking, and understanding of quirks. Izuku soon found himself surrounded by classmates who wanted his advice, so they could do well in today's lesson. After trying to understand their chatter for help, each talking to him at the same time, he had to get them to calm down somehow. It was done for him when Kirishima smashed his hardened arms together, making a loud noise, getting everyone's attention. Dudes, there is no point in crowding the little man, Kirishima placed himself in between his classmates. At this point, Tokoyami inserted himself into the discussion. Yes, let us politely and calmly ask him for assistance, the bird boy said in a shaming tone. It's not every day that the students get schooling in school by another student. A few mumbled apologies let Tokoyami know to continue. Midoriya-san, would you please be able to help those of us prepare for our upcoming afternoon class? Izuku had never had so many people come to him for advice, will anyone really, so he was excited to put some of his observations to the test. I can't be sure everything I suggest will work or be effective. I'll try to make sure it's at least explained well. He turned and grabbed his backpack and started pulling out his textbooks, his notebooks, and a dark thick leather-bound tome. Tokoyami curled an eyebrow at the last book, however he knew to wait as Izuku was going over some of his ideas with his classmates. Everything was nice and calm in the classroom, and as Izuku was discussing ways for Kaminari to handle the backlash of his power, possibly something to help him recharge quickly or to resist the amount of strain on his body. No one noticed the door open or who walked in until the book came with a primal growl. Everyone tensed and turned to their classmate who entered the room. Izuku knew what was going to happen next and reacted quickly as Bakugo flung himself across the room at his target. Izuku quickly dropped the book into his desk and pulled out his wand to levitate the desk to the ceiling, however Bakugo was faster. Not this time, nerd. Bakugo pulled a coin out of his pocket and flicked it at the wand. A small controlled explosion accelerated the coin with his quirk, enough to cut straight through the cheap plastic. This put a damper on his trick as the desk just floated at eye level now. Izuku instead dodged out of the way of the rocket man named Bakugo, who knew the book wasn't in the desk. As they say, nothing up my sleeve, but he knew there was something up his sleeve, and Bakugo wanted it. Give me the book, Bakugo cackled madly. It was almost eloquent, the two boys dancing, ducking, and weaving around punches, kicks, and explosions. The other students moved quickly to separate the two of them until a bright flash quickly blinded them and the smell of smoke began to fill the room, obscuring their visions. As the classmates' eyesight began to slowly return to them, it became apparent that this fight would not be contained to one room. The quick slamming of the door told them Izuku had just made his escape and Bakugo was hot on his tail. The trilling sound of pops and bangs heading away from them, Momo rushed out of the room followed by Kirishima and a few others. Tokoyami was awestruck the sight of a real book of magic. He had studied the occult as a hobby, since as a child he had thought his quirk might have been a demonic possession, since it seemed to have a sentience of its own. But after learning that its personality was more a construct of his own subconscious, and not a separate entity, he still kept it up since there were some very interesting stories about folklore and myths. But he had heard of real magic existing long ago, but that seemed more of a fantasy than anything, ignoring the irony of how quirks suddenly developed in a society that had none. But he knew enough to recognize the real deal if he saw one, and now Midoriya started to make sense. He shuffled back to his desk and plopped his head down and tried to come to terms with what might be a resurgence in magic and what that might mean for the world. Meanwhile, Izuku had a lead that was steadily if not rapidly shrinking. He made a quick grab and opened the nearest door to him and slid into the room, which happened to be the 1B homeroom. The sudden gasp as Izuku hurled himself behind the first rows of students' desks, just as Bakugo burst through the door. As Bakugo prowled the room, he shouted, "Come on out, nerd, hand over the book, and I'll make sure your death is quick and painful." The short blue-haired boy inquired, "Don't you mean quick and painless?" "I know what I said." Bakugo snapped, causing the boy to shrink back. However, Kendo didn't. She moved quickly forward. She knew Bakugo and Midoriya's history and wasn't going to tolerate him pulling his usual crap in front of her. "Now see here." Her shout caught the enraged boy's attention. "I won't tolerate this attitude, not like he does." She enlarged her hands and poked him in the chest. "You will not come into our homeroom chasing another student, and most certainly not one with your history. Or I swear I will do everything in my power to see you thrown out of this school." She all but screamed at him. Normally not one cowed by confrontation, in fact, normally thriving on it. Any response, which would have been of very colorful language, was cut short by another equally angry voice. "And don't think you can pull stunts like this in our homeroom either." Momo walked up behind him. "It's completely uncalled for to throw yourself at another student, let alone blind us, and fill the room with smoke. Over some books, no less." The other students of Wana ran into the room at this point, and suddenly Bakugo felt very alone. Here he didn't have most of the student body, and some of the faculty were afraid to stand up to him. Now he realized that this school was for the best, and that meant even if he knew that everyone was inferior to him, these people together wouldn't be afraid of confronting him. As he weighed his options, between destroying all of them or surrendering, his decision was made for him as Blood King entered his classroom, and seeing the extras promptly kick them out. As the students went to head back to their own room, Momo waited a moment. "Thank you, Kendo-san, for stopping Bakugo-san. I don't know what got into his head." She bowed as Izuku came back from behind his human shield, a silver-haired boy with shark teeth. "Yeah, really thank you, Itsuka-chan, he almost got my book this time." He gave her a quick hug and ran out of the room when Blood King started to grumble and growl. For the rest of the morning, Kendo was sporting a large blush. This was noted by her classmates, especially a head of blonde hair. After the walking catastrophe that is Bakugo, the students in the Wana Hero course were shocked to find that Izawa didn't expel Bakugo immediately for his actions. "Since no one actually got hurt, the smoke had already cleared up before I got into the room, and that being blinded was only temporary. If I was to take action, I would also have to take some against Midoriya-san." A few stammered no's, and Wise was shut up very quickly, because as it is, his desk is still the only thing affected. Izawa pointed to the desk that was still levitating a few feet off the floor. Sheepishly, Izuku pulled it back down and settled his folded hands on top of the desk, muttering an apology. "Now, because you have your utility course this afternoon, you will not be using your hero costumes once again." Noticing a few confused looks, Izawa sighed, because the point of the first few utility courses is to find out what you can do, not what your tools can do. That comes later. You're the hero, not your gear. After that concise explanation, the students were more assured that the teachers had a real plan for their education. Their normal classes had gone as normal as they could with a level of tension that was reserved for old Western saloons. Thankfully, lunch broke up the monotony. As Izuku sat down with Momo and Itsuka, who had for the last few minutes been going over notes with each other, he quietly tucked into his meal, unaware of the two figures creeping up on him, until he realized he was sandwiched between the two boys he had been talking to the previous night. "So, I get the van, you and Tokoyami-san drag him out, and we toss him in the ocean." The redeed started with a smirk. "Get fake names and disappear across the ocean, no one will be the wiser." Right. Alright, 1, 2, 3, break." "Well, what are you talking about?" As Izuku sputtered on his food, not expecting a conversation, much less one so confusing. For some reason, Kirishima-san has it in his head that the three of us are going to plan Bakugo-san's murder, cover up, and then fleeing the country. Tokoyami clarified. "You forget one important detail." "Oh yeah, and what would that be, my fine feathered friend?" Kirishima jokingly inquired. "You didn't include the two witnesses across from us." He gestured to Momo and Itsuka, who were listening intently on the best laid plans of mice and men. "Either we have to include them in our scheme or we need a way to silence them." Slapping his head, Kirishima chuckled. "How could I have been so foolish? He mockingly stated, I guess we will need to sacrifice our own green beans to the two to buy their silence. Both girls shared a look, deal, they said in unison. Catching the boys off guard, Kirishima leaned over Izuku. Do you think they planned that? No more than we did, my rambunctious red rapscallion. Tokoyami shot back. Izuku cleared his throat. Someone wants to tell me what we are all doing here. He wasn't used to this much attention, so it was confusing to him, having friends to banter with. There is nothing wrong with sitting with your friends at lunch and goofing off, is there? Kirishima stated, as if it was obvious. Also wanted to talk to you about this morning too, that was crazy. That was the book though, wasn't it? Izuku nodded. He mentioned it to them last night, casually, he didn't expect them to bother digging further. Can we see it? Midoriya was conflicted, he knew it wouldn't harm him to show the book, since only he could read it, but besides his mother he never showed it to anyone. Bakugo just wanted to burn it, not look at it. But when he saw the expectant look in his friend's eyes he knew it would be nice to share for once. Pulling it out of his sleeve, since he didn't bother putting it back in his bag, in case Bakugo got triggered by seeing him moving it about. So, he laid it on the table and opened the cover. He could see the writing and images properly as they were translated for him to the others, just like his mother. The strange language that littered the pages and hard to understand diagrams just caused them to develop more questions. Pendo was the first to start to voice her questions. Midoriya-kun, what is this? Tapping his finger on the book, this is the origin of my quirk, it's what I have been using to train for the last almost 4 years. After taking another bite of his lunch, he turned the pages a few times. I have been studying and training ever since I got the book, and I have improved greatly. But what language is this? She inquired further. Dunno, he shrugged and took another bite of his food. I just can read it though. That's, Kendo paused, interesting. Glancing to the others if they could tell if he was pranking her or not. A few shaken heads let her know they were unable to tell either. S&O. Wanna tell me how your quirk works then? Can't, he quickly responds. Well, more like won't, I could, but that's bad for me. Breaks a rule. Tokoyami was intrigued by any information he could get on real magic and was a tad more eager to get answers, so his normal aloofness took a backseat to his desire to know more. What rule? He asked, knowing that the others were more focused on why it would be bad for him to explain, rather than there being rules for magic. I know that many quirks, he added knowingly, have certain traits that function better or worse in specific conditions, but actual rules, could you explain more? Since Izuku realized that explaining the rules would lead to more questions, and they didn't have much time left for lunch, he had to set some rules to explain the rules. He found that amusing. Alright, there are a few rules that my quirk, making eye contact with Tokoyami, works by. I'll tell you the rules, but then we need to finish eating since utility is going to take up the rest of the day, so all questions will have to wait until later. Fair enough. Looking at his 4 friends, shocked a little that he has made so many friends in such a short amount of time, they all nodded and waited on him expectantly. Magic cannot be used to kill, nor can it be used to bring life back to those who lost it. Magic cannot interfere with love in all its forms, the purity of it cannot be tainted by magic. Magic cannot self-propagate, nor can it bring matter into existence. He recited the words from the first page. All members of his small but captive audience had many questions about what those rules imply about the abilities of their classmates. But they did agree to wait until a later time to ask him questions, and that might be for the best. It gives them time to digest not only their food, but to also come up with the right questions, and not just what they think of first. Lunch came and went, the students were a bit lethargic after a meal, and the excitement of the morning had passed. When finally, the time came for their more practical class, they were raring to go, heading back to the gym where they held the entrance exam. There was excited chatter as the students milled about, even though there were people who got in by taking the utility exam. The changes the teachers had made to their previous classes meant there was a chance this would be very different. Entering the gym, the instructors for the day's lesson were Hound Dog, Cementus, and Power Loader. Welcome students, came the slow tone of Cementus. I will explain the purpose of these lessons, then there will be a brief introduction before we move on to the first task. The students, more used to the different teachers than just the one they would have expected, were very excited to be learning from different professionals as this allowed them to better understand the world they were entering. My name is Cementus, I teach modern literature. Why I have been selected to head this course is because while my quirk cement may seem like a straightforward ability, its uses are only limited by how I can shape the concrete, therefore my imagination is my tool. As he stepped back, a man in a yellow construction rig stepped up. I am a power loader, I head the department of support. Which for those of you who don't know, are the students who will be making your gear while you attend this school, and the ones who do well, your gear while you are a professional. He too stepped back, leaving a third large wolf-looking man. Walking up and clearing his throat, he knew his role was important, but that many students in the past had ignored his advice or even him, to their own detriment. My name is Hound Dog, and I am the school's guidance counselor. Does anyone want to guess what my role in this school is? The boy with a large yellow body, shaped like a deformed glue bottle, raised his hand. Are you there to help us with our problems? He guessed. Every school had a guidance counselor, but most students didn't go to see them. Not quite. It's close, but what I do is important. I make you want to quit. A few of the students gasped. Why would a teacher want them to quit? Being a hero, it isn't for everyone. Sometimes you just burn out, other times an accident or injury puts you out of the fight for a while or forever. So, the school decided that a part of the utility course will be to help you develop skills, so that if for any reason you think you can't cut it as a hero, then you have other options to fall back on. He paused to let the students digest that information. He'd seen too many pros burn out, wash up or just get too hurt to continue, and then only to realize that they had no other job prospects. This led to many of them getting menial jobs just to make ends meet, or worse, turn to a life of crime. These kids would need to be prepared for that possible outcome. Now that doesn't mean I want you to fail. Far from it, I want everyone to reach their dreams and goals, but if those change to something other than being a pro hero, I will be there to help you assess your options and help you decide, in a way, to make you quit. As he stepped back to the other teachers, it was apparent that they had never been told they could do that, either because they never saw their own guidance counselors in middle school, or they just didn't have good ones. But this is UA, they make the best, because they are the best. Cementus took this as his cue to guide the class to the lesson. Thank you, Hound Dog, I am sure that gave the students quite a lot to contemplate. Now for the lesson, first we want each of you to fill out one of these sheets. As Hound Dog and Power Loader started to pass around the paper and pencils, Cementus shaped the ground into long tables and benches for the students. These are questionnaires that we would like to have answered so we can get a rough assessment for some files before we move on to more practical efforts. After putting their names on the paper, they started down the list of questions. Asking them about their quirk, where they were from, friends and family, information about their lives. Yes, most of this information is on file already at the school, but the difference is, you are giving it to us, in your own words. Hound Dog answered the unasked question. He knew there was a flaw in most files on heroes, it was just the numbers, the pure data, not anything that went into a person. It was important that they do this and see where they stand, the last question the most important. Why do you want to be a hero? Take as much time as you want, you don't even have to finish it today or this month. Nothing you put in this will be seen by anyone but myself, Recovery Girl and the principal, and even they must have a good reason to ask me for it. He wanted to emphasize the trust they could put in him. Teenagers have a nasty habit of bottling up problems or trying to solve them on their own, which they can, but it's helpful to have someone with more experience who could help them through the problem they don't see, instead of stumbling blind through life. Now hopefully what your homeroom teachers did was explain what the purpose of the lesson today is. After getting a few nods, Hound Dog continued. Excellent, so first you need to understand that every quirk can be used in more than one way. Cementus took over from here. My quirk is an excellent example, it on the surface is just a terraforming quirk, but it's how I use it that allows me to be one of the top heroes. I am sure that many of you have come to the conclusion that you know everything there is about your quirk, and you don't need to work on it any more than you already have. He looked for the telltale signs from many of the students who have done this, but a few stuck out that they didn't. Deciding he needed a volunteer, looking around the room until he picked onto a boy with orange hair. You, tell us your name, and a brief description of your quirk. The quick stammer as all teenagers are not ready to be called on in class. He shuffled up from his seat and straightened his gym uniform. Well, I'm Tsuburaba Kasei, and my quirk is solid air. I can form walls out of my breath. Exhaling he formed the air into a large disc. Excellent, came Cementus. Now, why does it do that? Working his head, do what? Taking the conversation exactly where he wanted it to. Cementus finished his thought. Form a disc. If it was solidifying the air, why does it form a disc and not say a cone as the air comes out or a tube? Well, I never thought about that, Kasei said, scratching his head. And that class is the point of this course. Most of you probably never even thought about why your quirk does what it does. If you can do that, it will greatly help you when it comes to figuring out what you can do with it. The class became much more enthused about the lesson since it became clear that most of them had never even considered how their quirks worked beyond a basic level. Your assignment for today is to analyze your own quirk. Being able to explain what it is and what you can already do is an effective method to figuring out what you might be missing. I'm sure you'll come up with some new uses by the end of the day. As the teachers watched the students begin to get up, Cementus had one more important thing to announce. Because of the nature of this class, there will be no homework assigned. This led to cheers from many students. However, if you don't take this course seriously, I will know. Everyone progresses at a different rate, some quirks are easy to find new ways to use, others not so much. Inwardly knowing that many of the more basic seeming quirks are the ones harder to come up with new ways, but tend to also have the most unique uses. We will be looking out for your effort, so don't waste this opportunity. Seeing as the importance of today's lesson is literal self-study, you will be dismissed early. Next week we will open the gym to you all, so you can see what you have considered. Since just envisioning the ways to use your abilities is not the same as being able to do it. As the students rose to get themselves ready to go, Izuku pondered what Hound Dog meant about quitting. It sounded good, he understood that had he not gotten his magic, then he would have had to do something with his life, but he never considered what he would do with his magic if he didn't want to be a hero. It never came to him that he could have these amazing powers and not do good with them. He couldn't see how anyone could do that. But then again, there are villains. He muttered. What was that, Izuku-kun? Itsuka came up behind him, taking him out of his own thoughts. Oh, just thinking about what Hound Dog was saying, he answered. Oh, that, crazy, right, like who would quit this, waving her arm around the school, seeing the students walking the grounds. I guess, but it's something I never thought about, not being a hero. He sighed. I always wanted to be one, but what if I can't do it, what else do I have to fall back on? I don't want to end up hating this, or getting too hurt to do it, and find out I can't do anything else with my life. I know of quite a few villains who started as heroes, and just couldn't keep doing it. What if that happens to me? Whoa, heavy stuff, but come on, you're top of the class, she grabbed his shoulder. If anyone can make it, it's going to be you, and for becoming a villain, not going to happen, you are much too sweet to go dark. I guess thanks to Itsuka-chan, Izuku beamed up at her. It's great to get some support from the people you care about. It helps make the problem seem smaller, knowing that I have people who believe in me. As they chatted and walked back to the dorms, they missed that despite her only being a few feet behind them, Momo didn't show up to the dorm until just before supper was served. What's it like being a student at UA? How's All Might as a teacher? Aren't you that kid that got taken hostage last year? As the shouts and questions of the reporters outside the school gate got louder and more invasive, Izuku was glad that he was already in the grounds because of the dorms. Would suck to have to walk through that. Oh, there's Bakugo. Looking out his window, seeing a large cloud of smoke appear at the gate, followed by a quickly moving body. Just ignore that for now. Kachin is not a morning person on a normal day. Getting all up in his face is a one-way ticket to Pain Town, but it's Friday, and if all goes well, I will have made it through my first week. As Izuku made his way down to the kitchen to make some breakfast, he noticed a few small groups of people looking over homework in the common room. Glad I got mine done last night. A few people noticed and gave a quick good morning, but other than that, it was quiet. Until a sudden burst of energy came into his life in the form of an excited pink teenage girl. Midoriya-san, Mina cried. Can you help me with my homework, please? Scrunching up her face at him. Yeah, sure, which class is it? Izuku had no problem with looking over someone's answers and making some corrections. Utility. She stated matter-of-factly, I can't think of other ways to use my quirk. At this, a few of the other dorm mates were more interested in the response that Izuku could give. Well, he pondered as he poured himself a cup of coffee. What can you do now? He didn't want to waste everyone's time with suggestions she already had come up with. Well, I can secrete acid from my feet and it makes the floor all slick and I can slide around pretty quickly. She raised her finger to start counting off. I can throw my acid like a snowball and I'm working on a way to make it gooier to form walls and stuff. But I already had that before I came to the UA and now I can't think of anything. Izuku pondered for a moment, buttering a slice of toast. That's not a bad start. Izuku said, well, the first thing that I did when I got started on learning my powers was mobility. How can I use my powers to get me from point A to point B, and you have one way to do that, but have you considered the third dimension? He asked. What do you mean by the third dimension, Midoriya-san? Mina replied, the question intriguing her. Well, most people when they think about how they get from one place to another is how they move along the ground, so unless you have a quirk that lets you fly, most people don't consider this. He munched on his toast as he began frying some eggs. However, there are more ways to move around that flying and running. If you could secret acid from your fingertips, couldn't you make handholds and walls to climb around? He finished. Mina started to think about that. That's not a bad idea, I'll have to try that sometime. Izuku recognized his good deed for the day and went back to finish making his breakfast. So why did you start with mobility? Seems a little arbitrary, doesn't it? We all walk around most of our lives, so being mobile is something we always do. He played his food. That means it's easier to learn new ways to move around than other things. As he sat at a kitchen table, his audience of people he didn't notice around him had gained a few people. Additionally, as a hero, getting to the scene of villain attacks or rescues is very important, so being able to find a faster or more efficient way to do that just seemed practical. He began to quickly eat his meal. Lastly, in a fight, being more mobile means you get hit less often or not at all, and there are some really nasty things you don't want to get hit by, so moving is very important for heroes. Incredibly, thanks to Midoriya-san, Mina rushed and gave him a tight hug. That's a great place to start, and you even gave an amazing explanation for it too. Top of our class for a reason. She, along with most everyone, went back to their assignment and to think about what Izuku had given them. The slow drawl called out to him though, so what's the real reason you start with mobility? Izuku chuckled, not thinking anyone would ask about how practical it was. Kachan, did you know he can use those explosions to fly? Tokoyami began laughing along with him. Oh, this school year is going to be crazy. Homeroom was quiet as they waited for Eraserhead to wake up from his sleeping bag in the corner. More than one student questioned why such a nocturnal person was chosen to lead their morning classes. When the bell rang, however, he slumped up to the podium. Good morning, brats. Today you need to pick someone to be student council president and vice president. Figure it out for yourselves. At which point he crawled under his desk to escape the bright fluorescent lights above. At this, the students began shouting to each other how they should have the position. After a few minutes, the ideas came down to dance off, since every hero movie is doing that now, a free-for-all are voting for it. Well, since we live in a civilized society, we won't solve the problem by beating each other up, and since this isn't a movie, we can't solve things with dancing. So can we just skip the weird suggestions and call a vote? Momo's calm voice came. Most of the class nodded, but there were a few disappointed grunts. After tallying the results, in a landslide of 4 whole votes, Midoriya was voted class president, with the vice president being surprisingly Todoroki with 2 votes. So the rest of the day continued as normal until lunch. Izuku-kun, crooned Momo. Over here. As she stood by a table laden with food, waving her arms to get his attention. As he squeezed himself through the crowd of students, he wondered why they didn't stagger the lunches, since it seemed like they took all the first-year students and gave them lunch at the same time. Which seems to misuse a great advantage of having the different years as classes mingle. But he just figured he wouldn't ever meet any second or third year students at this school, so he resigned himself to the idea that he would have to keep to his own year instead. Midoriya sat down and took stock of the other occupants of his table. Momo and Itsuka returned to discussing something Midnight said during hero art class, which, while he likes heroes, the idea of studying art history of heroes isn't as fun as one would think. Tokoyami was perched, yes, actually perched, he noticed on the back of the bench, and it made him wonder just how much of a bird he actually is and how much is he playing it up. Kirishima was poking, prodding at his food, and glancing around the hall, but for all of Izuku's skills, he could not determine what it was that was so fascinating for the red-headed boy. Until a massive explosion rocked the windows, and a loud siren started blaring overhead. Attention students, there has been a breach of the outer walls. Please orderly return to your homerooms for further instruction from your homeroom teachers. Do not panic. 3, 2, 1. Though Izuku, and then the students all panicked. Surprisingly for a bunch of teenagers all in a school, to teach them to be heroes, they are a skittish bunch, and were rushing the surprisingly small doors of the cafeteria, considering all the other doors were sized for people who were considerably larger than the average person. So when everyone at his table motioned to get up and move, Izuku raised his hand and scanned the crowd, looking for a distinctive head of hair. When he finally noticed a bi-colored fop, he moved through the mass of students all pushing each other to get out of the room. Todoroki-san, Izuku called to get the boys' attention. What can we do to get everyone to calm down? This is just going to end up with people getting hurt. Why is it our problem if people get injured? He coldly asked. They should have just listened to the instructions and followed them. We are the class representatives, we need to set an example. He quickly looked over the mass of students, formulating a plan. Before someone decides to start using their quirk to clear a path, how about you freeze everyone's feet? That would make getting through the door very hard for them. Huffing to himself, Todoroki firmly planted his foot to the ground, freezing the moisture in the air around people's feet. As the first few people tried to move forward to keep pushing, they all quickly fell towards the people in front of them. As the cries of panic turned into annoyance at the inconvenience of being stuck on the floor, the students, since they were made up of the first-year students, turned to see the famous boy with ice powers, folded arms, and scowl plastered on his visage. Izuku took this as his cue to speak. Thank you all for chilling out. He chuckled to himself, now that you have all made sure to follow the instructions that we were given. He continued sarcastically. Quite a number of students grumbled at his attitude. Can someone please look out the window and see if they can find anything? The tall furried boy looked over the yard and saw the teachers strolling up to a camera crew and reporter. Hey, it's just the news, they got in somehow. He yelled out. At the indication of the mediocrity of the emergency, the students started to mumble about how they knew it wasn't a big deal and they were just going with everyone else. Because that's what teenagers do. As Todoroki turned the heat up in the room to melt the ice down for the students to break free, Izuku moved over to where the school chef Lunch Rush was placing his arms on the counter, watching the students. So were you just going to stand here and watch or get people to calm down before it turned into a riot? Izuku questioned the teacher that was in the room with him the entire time. As the culinary hero chuckled to himself, probably watch, it was pretty funny how so many people just can't keep their shit together. He started laughing at the look that covered Izuku's face. Oh, don't look at me like that, I just cook the food. It's not my job to make sure the kids can handle a minor catastrophe. Izuku shrugged, that's fair I guess. He recognized this as the same attitude from last year, older heroes not going beyond what they knew or were responsible for. On the other side of the campus, in a small room lit only by the light of a computer screen, a blonde-haired boy pulled a small camera out of a ventilation duct and stored the memory card away in a locked box in his desk. A smart person would know that normal teenagers left unsupervised tend toward a penchant to cause chaos. Superpowered teenagers as a result will cause superpowered chaos. What happened on the first Friday night at the brand new, undestroyed UA dorms led to new house policies enacted to protect themselves from each other. It had all seemed so innocent at the time, a simple phrase that was resounded by cheerful laughs and joy. It had all turned so wrong so very fast. Hey, let's all watch a movie. No one was sure who started it all, but they were sure of one thing, that person was an asshole. The dorm's common room was well furnished with many tables and couches, but what really caught the attention of the occupants was the very large, 70 UHD flat screen that was mounted on the wall. Apparently, the principal thought they deserved some sort of gift for being in the dorms and a means to get the students to spend time outside their rooms. It was theorized by many students later that the television was simply a means for him to run an experiment on the roommates. In interviews, Principal Nedzu has denied all allegations of such an experiment. The arguments ran for a good half hour of what movie they should watch. It was a dead heat between All Might 4, The All, and the Mightiness, and the remake of the reboot of the reimagining of the retelling of Titanic, directed by Michael Bay VI. That was until someone pulled it out, a bootleg copy of a movie that wasn't even in theaters yet. This, my friends, neighbors, and compatriots, is a copy of Blood Slasher 3, gasps were heard around the room. Dude, that's piracy, Kirishima shouted. Yeah, you wouldn't steal a car, or a purse, or a TV, or a pizza, or Tangier, cried Mina. We are heroes in training, it would behove us to remain on the side of virtue and lawfulness. The pious statement came from Shiozaki. Yeah, but I already have it downloaded on a disc right here, and it would be such a waste to not watch it now, since watching it isn't a crime. I'll even promise to delete it afterwards. Shoji responded, offering a compromise. After some grumbling from the pure-hearted teenagers, they grudgingly accepted to watch it because everyone else was doing it, and peer pressure is a hell of a drug. As the students began to settle in, getting close to each other under the blankets, and sharing various snacks from simple popcorn to more intricate birds' nests. Spirits were high as the movie started until the first kill. Since the advent of quirks, in many professions they were discouraged from use since many of them were in public, such as concerts and general day-to-day work. However, a market that never cared about regulations when profit and vision were there was Hollywood. Regularly flaunting quirk usage rules and general safety, this led to an explosion, in some cases literal, resurgence in movie interest. Quirks just made it that more real, CGI, and quirks together made for some very realistic scenarios, and boy did the horror genre love that. They developed special cameras to work with some people's quirk, and it was almost like you were actually there sometimes. So when people said the Blood Slasher series was the scariest, and the rumors of test audience for Blood Slasher 3 being sent to the hospital for panic attacks and cardiac arrest, the students were in over their head. No one shut off the television when the movie ended, but only because no one was in the common room after the halfway mark of the movie. The students had holed themselves in their rooms, barricading entire stretches of the hallways from any possible intruder. It didn't help that some of the students were afraid of each other. Normally it would be irrational to be afraid of their own friends and classmates, but the Blood Slasher was more than just a movie, it was an urban legend, a young schoolgirl who went around killing and was so effective at it because she could look like anyone. In an interview, the writer for the original had said that he was inspired and terrified of the Blood Slasher because he swore that he met a young girl who took on the appearance of his at the time unknown murdered wife. He barely survived, had it not been for his own quirk that let him control his blood flow, not a particularly useful quirk for fighting villains, but for a horror movie director to be able to show how blood is supposed to move, it was a godsend for his career. He would then be found 2 weeks after that interview in a dumpster with half his face disintegrated off. So, the movies kept coming out, and people kept getting scared. Just like tonight. The next morning when Powerloader got called in to check a complete power failure at the first-year hero dorms, the teachers found the dorm in a state that could only be called a war zone. It took a few hours to disarm all of the traps and to coax out all of the students, then another hour with Hound Dog for him to get it into the teenagers that none of them could be the blood slasher, since she could only steal your appearance, not the quirk. So as soon as everyone demonstrated their abilities, they all calmed down in the presence of the others. As the teachers walked away, muttering about stupid kids and late-night movies. PFFT, stealing quirks. Scoffed Hound Dog. How stupid could you get? It's not possible. The morning went much smoother as the students broke off from each other and did their normal routine. It wasn't until noon when Izuku walked back into the dorm after his daily jog around the campus. He noticed that Momo was sitting down in the common room reading what looked like a thick book on advanced chemistry. He took a few steps toward her, wanted to sit next to her, but instead he stopped. He remembered back in the locker room what Monoma had said. He of course knew the guy was a jerk of the highest caliber, and he shouldn't let this one person's rough comments interfere in a close relationship he was forming with Momo or Itsuka, but the doubt that he had grown up with, that he had never been able to fully clear out of his mind, it made him hesitate. But just maybe part of what was said was right. Was he sullying their reputation by being so forward? He didn't think he was just doing what he always did. However, it wouldn't hurt him to take a step back for the weekend, would it? Surely, he could wait until Monday before pressing this further, just to prove to himself this isn't going too fast. With reluctance he took a silent step away from the raven-haired young lady and went up the stairs to his room. He could practice his set for the next week of practical courses. Momo however was aware of Midoriya behind her. It wasn't hard, with the overly large TV off, since no one wanted to be near it so soon after the previous night's movie. She could see him standing in its reflection, looking over the edge of her book, so as not to look suspicious she watched him. As he took a few steps toward her, and then hesitate, and so, she waited to see what he would do. Only after about a minute of silence he turned away and walked up the stairs to the boys' dorms. With a heavy sigh, she closed her book and made her way up the stairs to the girls' side of the dorm. She had some thinking to do, which was both good and bad. She was smart, so thinking was something she was good at, but this was bad, because she never thought she would think about this. She had expected that romance for her was some arranged marriage to some knuckle-dragging mongoloid who could barely form two sentences as a means to increase her family's wealth. Sure, she could always say no, but would she? Before this week she hadn't expected to make friends, let alone find a boy she was interested in. In another universe she might have just gone with a marriage and lived a cold and isolated life, giving up on her dream of being a hero and just doing whatever it was her parents wanted, but now, she had people who cared, who wanted her to succeed and live her dreams. And this boy was hurting, some way somehow something was wrong, and she was going to find out what it was. Monday, Itsuka and herself had both agreed to take a hands-off approach to Midoriya until they completed their first week of classes, so she would just wait until the weekend was over, then get to the bottom of the problem. Easy as that. The wise man once said, man tracked, ungot lacked. So, if she was clairvoyant like another famous hero was, she would see how stupid it was to plan anything personal for Monday, after screaming her head off at the pain that was headed their way. She however, was not, so she quietly made her way to her room to make sure she was ready for whatever life threw at her. The energy in the homeroom on Monday morning was immense. The students had gotten over the weekend jitters, some students had made tearful calls to their parents, mostly about how exciting it was to be here, what they were learning, some expressing how much they missed their families. The door to the Wana classroom opened, and the students, having spent the last week learning the routine, quickly got to their seats. Aizawa entered the room, 4 seconds, not bad. He had taken to timing how long it took them to be quiet once the day started. He had them for only a short amount of time before they started their normal education. Today is a special day. Aizawa addressed his students, because UA didn't spend a not so insignificant portion of our budget on a few thousand robots for the admittance test, we were able to put that money instead on securing trips to various sites to further your real-world experience. He waited for the excited chatter to quiet before continuing. Normally this is reserved for the third-year students, however the principal has decided that seeing how the industry, he said with bio-laced tone, handles the different aspects of our pro-hero society, so for those of you who are not familiar with how that works. Turning glances at Iida and Todoroki. As such, the first field trip, which will be today, is for the Hero Corps students to learn how to rescue others in different situations. The wall panels open to reveal their hero cases, and because I keep making bets with my coworkers, I have to take you all for the morning trip, so gather your crap and be down by the entrance gate to be loaded into the buses. As Aizawa headed out the door he stopped. Oh, and the Department of Support will be observing you all today. So, try to act professional and don't embarrass me. Later down at the buses, the hero students were milling about in clusters. Midoriya walked over to his vice president. Todoroki-san, we should spread out between the two buses. The bi-colored boy curled his eyebrow. What makes you say that? He questioned. Midoriya rubbed his hand against his neck nervously. Well, it might have to do with getting the other departments to better know us. Since they will be making some of our equipment, being more than that might make it better for student relations. Todoroki thought on that, Endeavor never really gave two shits about treating his employees well. He mostly just ordered his support department to make stuff that he needed. I can see where Midoriya-san is coming from. Those workers never did look too happy to see my dad walk in. I can relate. That's a reasonable idea, he concluded. Great, Midoriya cheered, now we just have to split them up. As Midoriya thought of the best way to separate the students, Todoroki instead acted, forming a wall of ice between two halves of the students. Listen up, Todoroki shouted. We're splitting up the class between the two buses to better get to know the different departments. Mina, irritated that her conversation partner got put on the other side of the wall, shouted back, and who put you in charge, huh? Putting her hands on her hips in defiance. You did when you voted for us. Todoroki quickly retorted. Oh yeah, Mina sticking out her tongue and skipped onto the bus. Seeing that others began filing in on whichever side of the ice they were on. Todoroki-san, that was a bit. Izuku paused, cold. That's sufficient, he responded and entered the second bus, ending that conversation. Seeing his bus, he glowered. He managed to get all the social people. Ashido and Hagakure were busy bouncing around the carriage with Kaminari, and Hanto in the back loudly laughing about some video game magazine. Jiro was listening to music loudly on her headphones. Aoyama was busy taking hundreds of photos of himself, with the flash on. Sato and Uraraka were busy talking about baked goods. Then he heard it. Behind the driver was the very not workplace-friendly mutterings of Bakugo. He quickly switches buses with Midoriya only to run into Izawa. After the homeroom teacher took stock of the bus he won. I have got to stop making bets about what parts of my job I do, and if I have to suffer this crap, so do you. He poked Todoroki in the chest. Back on the other bus. Midoriya and Yaoi Rozu had gotten everyone into their seats and were quietly discussing their excitement in small groups. Tsuyu and Iida were discussing their families in the back. Ajiro and Kirishima were talking about the latest martial arts movie and how they wanted to incorporate some of the moves into their fighting style. Shoji and Tokoyami seemed to be sharing a seat, both looking to be taking a nap. Koda and Shinso seemed to be having a good conversation, the near-mute boy responding with his writing board, which for the boy who could mind control people with a response, seemed very pleased that someone had no problems communicating with him at all. Despite the boy's normal shyness at social contact, the slightly overweight bus driver got on. Well, you are the most well-behaved passengers I have ever had. UA is definitely the best school if they teach manners like that. Putting on his cap. When the support students got on the buses, one group was happy with the nice and relaxed atmosphere, the other got caught up in a storm of activity. Both were very useful experiences to learn about the students. As the bus took off, Momo turned to Izuku, who was seated next to her. You seem nervous, do you not like car rides? Waving his hands in front of himself. No, it's just I'm a bit nervous about the support students watching us, that's all. Tsuyu joined the conversation. Midoriya-chan, you were the top performer in the entrance exam, and you do quite well academically. What do you have to be nervous about, Jiro? The support students took great interest, intrigued that they were somehow putting pressure on the person who seemed to be the top hero of their year. Well, it's just I've never had an audience. Midoriya responded. Dude, don't you remember when you were up against Ms. Midnight? Practically everyone was watching you. Kirishima added, trying to get him to remember when he did have an audience. Midoriya did remember, but that's different. It's like when I trained with All Might, I could just tune out everything but him, unknowingly slipping out that the other hero students knew he trained with was All Might because he had already told Kirishima that. The bus swerved a little. He felt bad that he was eavesdropping on the conversations of the teenagers, but this one was very interesting. He responded to the radio from the other bus. If everything was alright, yeah, it's fine, Eraserhead, the kids just got a bit rowdy. Shouts of All Might rang around the bus. Midoriya shrunk at the sudden cacophony of sound. Yaoi Rozu, Kirishima, and Tokoyami quieted down the other students. Izuku-kun, you were trained by All Might? Momo calmly asked him. Midoriya nervously nodded his head. Was that after the incident with the sludge villain? Midoriya nodded again. That makes sense then. She concluded. It does? Midoriya sheepishly asked. It does? Cried out from some of the other students. Yes, I decided after they showed us that video on the first day to look more into that incident. All Might had been chasing that villain for well over an hour after his first reported purse snatching, she explained. So, it was nearly 2 hours later that he had taken hostages. Everyone was paying attention to her talking. which meant that Izuku-kun had come across that villain and almost captured him before All Might showed up. So? Asked a support student. Exasperated that others were not able to follow along with her logic, it means that All Might saw that Izuku-kun had a lot of potential if before receiving any professional training was able to almost capture a villain that eluded him for such a long period of time. Seeing a writing board in the air, written on it the words, "That makes sense. Thank you, Koda-san," she replied. Though Koyami took this time to sneak into the conversation and try to alleviate some of the pressure, that means Izuku, even without training from All Might, was already close to the level of a professional hero, and that attention he got was purely a result of his own talent and training. Izuku was so happy that he had so many people looking out for him, he could cry. "Wow, so it makes sense that you would be the top of the class then," a support student said. Hiroshima butted in, "But now with All Might teaching all of us, I'm going to be the best soon enough," he boasted. Other students started declaring they would be the best as well. The enthusiasm was high in the first bus. Izuku turned to Momo and Tokoyami. "Thanks for sticking up for me." Hiroshima walked over and draped his arm around the small boy. "Nonsense, it's what friends do." Sharing a laugh. "Targets are en route to location, over." A figure said, placing down a pair of binoculars. They were viewing two vehicles as they passed by a ridge. "Any sign of the primary?" crackled an earpiece. "Negative, must either be at location or get caught up being a hero," the figure spat out. "And plan for everything, rendezvous with the group, prepare to seal them in." The earpiece died. The figure packed up the small number of tools it had and stepped into a shadow. The buses pulled up in front of a very large stadium. Upon exiting they were in awe of the sheer size of the facility. "Universal Studios Japan?" asked the invisible girl. As the group of students entered the building, seeing the size and what it contained, Aizawa addressed the class. "This is the Unforeseen Simulation Joint Facility. Titled USJ. It is Universal Studios Japan," came an excited cry from the pink girl. As a figure walked up the steps to the students, "Since I helped build this place, I like to call it the ultimate space for jams." "It's 13, cried Uraraka, excited to see one of her favorite heroes. "Yes, it's me," the space hero spoke. "Since I'm here, I'm certain, if Aizawa hadn't already told you, but this exercise will be based on your ability to rescue people in different scenarios." Turning to Aizawa, "Where's you-know-who? Used up all his time, he'll be here at the end for the kids." The homeroom teacher responded. "Ugh, he makes a great hero, but that time limit makes it hard for him to be a teacher." Izuku and a few students were able to hear the quiet conversation over the other students muttering. Only Izuku understood what they were talking about though. As the private conversation ended, 13 readdressed the students and started to explain the purpose of the facility. When a swirling black portal opened in the center of the facility, Aizawa tensed up. He reached down to his radio. "Hey, are you still out there?" as he attempted to make contact with the bus driver. Outside, a limp arm hung down over the steering wheel, dripping blood into a pool that ran along the floor. "Okay, everyone back to the door," as he shepherded his charges back to the entrance. When Sato pushed on it to shove it open, "It's locked," he cried out. 13 pushed in front and put a key into the lock, twisting it, but the door still wouldn't budge. Trying to contact the school, the space hero shouted to Aizawa. Tapping his headset, "It's jammed." Amanari also tapping his headset. Because of his quirk he could overcharge the signal to boost it through a lot of dampening. "Mine's out too." "Shit, it's a total blackout. The only way to get help is to get outside." Aizawa walked back over to the stairs and saw that some of the villains were beginning the long climb. He addressed the group behind him. 13 Watch the kids, I'll buy as much time as I can, hopefully someone notices something is wrong. If you have to fight, stay safe. Before jumping down and kicking a few of the villains off the stairs. "Okay, anyone whose quirk might cut through that door, get started." Mina rushed up and threw acid on the center of the door. "It's going to take a while to eat through this," she shouted over the nervous and scared student. "Just keep at it, we need to get out of here," someone cried. "Oh, I wouldn't worry about that," a voice came from behind them, a shadowy vortex opening, and a few villains stepping out. "We are ready for this. We will just have to spread you out to start picking you off, one by one," he started. An explosion cut him off. "Pyu Kyau!" Bakugo shouted as he charged a villain along with Kirishima. "That won't do at all, kids these days, no manners." Kurogiri thought, before his shadows started to engulf the students. Only those who threw themselves to the side escaped the pull of his quirk. Midoriya stood up, his eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness, high wind, and heavy rain. He could see shapes moving in the darkness. "Yup, it's the downpour's own." Hearing a scream, he rushed further into the storm. Momo heard a loud explosion go off near her head, covering her ears. She looked up to see a pissed off Bakugo. He looked at her, then saw a villain, and rushed forward through the devastated building. Taking in her surroundings, she could see more desolate surroundings and decided she must be in the ruin zone. She heard a villain coming up behind her, licking their lips. She shot a staff out of her back, hearing a groan of pain, and quickly grabbed it and cracked him over the head. Deku goes mad, cackling, and screams of terror could be heard further along the building. She ran to catch up to the class's personification of anger issues. When Kirishima hit the water, he almost sank, having his body harden for an attack. When he saw someone swimming quickly at him with sharp teeth, he smirked and softened his body. The difference in density shot him straight up and out of the path of the villain. Shifting his density rapidly, he was able to make it to a boat that was floating in the middle of a lake. The villain surrounding the large vessel. "Oh good, you're here." He turned to see a pair of crossed eyes inside goggles, staring at him. "How good are you at engineering?" she asked quickly. "I used to help my dad fix stuff around the house." Kirishima answered the weird question. "Great, help me get this boat started. I don't want to be out here when they realize they can just sink this." Tokoyami and Jiro were fighting off villains as the broken ground offered dark shadow places to jump out and attack, and the loose rocks let Jiro fire them off with blasts from her feet. Shinso was doing his best to fight off attacks from behind the two and trying to get the villains to talk back to him. But for some reason everyone kept their lips sealed. Almost like they knew about his quirk. Sai was struggling between keeping out of the flames and the various attacks headed her way. Her amphibian nature was making it very difficult to remain clear-headed. She did what she could to run over towards Todoroki, who had a circle of villains surrounding. And what she could tell, taunting him. The villains watched as a portal opened, but no one stepped through. It took them a few seconds to remember that there was an invisible girl amongst the class and started trying to track her down, failing to hear her over the sounds they were making from all the loose rock. Down in the center, Aizawa was fighting a circle of villains when a large tail and a large yellow student crashed into the villains. "I thought I told you all to leave." He scolded them. "We didn't have much choice," Mishiro responded before flipping over a charging villain with bull horns and slapping him strongly with his tail. "Yeah, that warping guy sent us here, probably got a lot of us too," Sato added. "Great, just what we needed, now everyone is lost," their teacher muttered, grabbing some villains with his scarf. The very large, muscular, black villain waiting in the back beside a villain covered in hands. "Maybe you should go play." He giggled. "Okay, now I need you to bend that piece of metal into an L shape," the cross-eyed girl ordered Kirishima. "Now I'm tough, but not that strong." He gave the girl grief. Your body is as hard as steel, just apply leverage, and the metal will bend." She rapped him on his head with her wrench. He winced at the force. "Alright, I'll try." Flexing his arms, he squeezed the long sheet of metal into the needed shape. Surprised at what he accomplished, he handed her the bent piece. "Great, see what happens when you use your quirk with a little physics." She cackled at him. "Hopefully they are none the wiser about what we are attempting to do." "Yeah, they are just waiting in the water." Kirishima peeked over the side. The villains were still circling the boat. "Well, no reason to dwell on that, now I just need a charge. Give me your cell phone." She put her hand out. "But no, what if we need to call for help?" Kirishima shirked away from her. She smacked him on the head again. "You fell in the water, your phone is toast, and if you remember our teacher, the signal is jammed, and his equipment is better than your store-bought cell phone, so its only purpose now is as a battery to jumpstart this ship." Sighing, he handed over the device. "I just got it last month, going to lose all my contacts." He moped. The girl laughed maniacally. "I'll be in your new contact list," she said, rubbing up against him. His reaction wasn't one of embarrassment but forced acceptance. "Look, if you really don't want to." Kirishima panicked. "No, it's fine, it's just a stressful situation, and I'm a little freaked out, okay?" He very quickly responded. "Great, we can be friends." She turned back and started connecting wires to the ripped out battery of the phone. "I'm Meihatsu." She waved her arm at him. "Bijiro Kirishima," he leaned against the doorframe. "So what's support like?" Making idle conversation. "Oh, it's great, working in a professional workshop like that. Power Loader is a genius with his work," she rambled. "How's being a hero?" "It's pausing to think about it. Weird," he answered. "Weird how?" "I guess I applied for the UA not to be a hero, but to stop bullies." He started. "My quirk wasn't nearly as strong. I got cuts and bruises all the time. It was more like a callus than it was rock. I got into fights all the time, trying to stop bullying. But one day, I don't know, not a villain, just a huge scary guy was on the street, and the people near him looked like they were in danger, and I didn't act. I stood there, and Ishido-san, the pink girl, talked him away." Hatsune worked silently, listening to him tell his story. She only had a little bit longer before she could turn on the engine. "It was eye-opening. I would fight other kids because I could, but when I saw someone scary I froze. I trained really hard just to get this strong, and then it turns out one of the strongest in our class is a bully. Hatsune paused. Someone in the UA is a bully, how did that not get noticed? And the weirder thing is the person he bullied is also here, and he told me not to tell on him. I don't know what to do. He glanced over the water, he could barely see the shapes of the large group of villains in the center. I want to do more, but I don't know how. I think you just need to keep at it. Unlike me, you don't have your goal in life set. It's alright to not know what you want, even if it's not what you thought, and then sometime in the future when you meet. Hatsune paused in her advice. Got it. Cackling, she hit a button on the dash by the wheel. The engine kicked to life, grabbing various levers and shoving them all forward. Do you know how to drive one of these? He asked, falling to the side as the ship lurched forward. Nope. She gave a huge bellowing laugh as the boat raced forward until it crashed into the ground by the center of the field. When the invisible teenager joined the school, she knew a few things about herself. I am not that strong, my quirk makes me invisible, but underneath that I'm just a teenage girl. With that understanding, she took various lessons to maximize the benefit of her quirk. She trained with martial artists on takedown maneuvers and how to move as quietly as possible, since she realized she might only get one shot at sneaking around. So, when she noticed all the villains moving around loosening rocks in the landslide, she made sure to put that to her benefit. Agakure moved when the villains did to blend her sound in with theirs, and she always walked downhill of their own searching, so any shifting rocks would be only seen as moving, because the rocks they knocked down the hill caused those to move. She headed towards the edge of the area, away from the villains, where she spotted a door with a large square sign on it. When she made it over to a door, she hoped it was an emergency exit, but it was instead labeled, employee only. Resigned, she touched the door, only to notice it had been propped open. Quickly she slipped through, nudging the door wider, and then holding it carefully, shut it without a sound. Seeing as the hallway went up, she followed the path until she saw the light in a room labeled, security office. Peeking through the crack of the door, Agakure saw a woman sitting in a chair laughing. Teach those fools not to accept me into their school, she cackled again as it looked like the villains were fighting the students and heroes on the monitors. I could have been a great hero, but no, I couldn't beat those stupid robots, so I didn't make it. Well, who's laughing now? Just because my quirk only works on moving signals and not the direct electronics, now look who can't call for help. Agakure gasped, then ducked her head back into the hallway. She's blocking the signal. If I take her out we might be able to call for help. She looked around for anything to help take out her foe, finding none. Well, I have one shot at this. The invisible girl snuck into the room before quietly coming up behind the woman, pulling her into a sleeper hold, dropping her body low so the woman couldn't get any leverage to get out of the chair she was in. Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. She held tight for a minute before the woman stopped struggling and gagging. Lowering her to the floor, she checked her pulse just to be sure she hadn't killed her. Now to find a way to tell them they can call for help. Oh, I wish I had pockets, but no, I have to be naked. She looked around and saw a microphone, realizing it was connected to the speaker system. Okay, I can contact them, but what do I say? She worriedly paced the room. If I warn them they can contact the outside, what will the villains do? Oh, why can't getting people out be as easy as getting in? Snapping her finger, I got it. She pushed the button on the microphone. Across the facility the speakers crackled to life. Tokoyami, Jiro, and Shinso had just beaten the last of the villains. Tired, they fell to the ground. That's intense, Jiro said, catching her breath. And it's not over yet, kiddos, a voice called out. I'm the puppet master. When I have my string on someone I can control their bodies. The figure dressed as a clown danced around tugging on strings, the bodies of the defeated villains lurching up, seeming held up by strings. Ugh, we just got done beating them, and now we have to do it all over again, Jiro complained. This is a very unfortunate position to be in. We are too tired to fight them all over again, even if they can't use their quirks. Tokoyami agreed, painting on the ground. If I can just get him to respond to me, then I can make him stop. Shino thought, hey bozo, what are you going to have them do to us? The clown stopped. He had explicit instructions to not speak to the one that looked like a zombie. But if I can't order them to attack, they'll just stand there. The three teen heroes noticed the unconscious villains just standing around, getting back up. They had it in them to beat up one more bad guy. Come on, you can tell us, what are you going to have them do? Shinso asked again. It must be really bad for you to want to hurt innocent kids like us. The demented clown could see he was surrounded. He wasn't much of a fighter, it's why he was in the back. Once everyone had been knocked down he was going to get them back up again over and over, wearing down the heroes. He remained quiet until the three teens piled on him and started wailing away at him. Please stop, he cried, then felt himself lose control over his body. Now, tell us your plan, Shinso ordered. Kill all might, with our weapon. The clown mechanically answered. Who are you working for? The League of Villains. Where is your base located? I don't know. Who runs the League of Villains? They call him Sensei. Shinso was getting annoyed. What does he look like? I never met him. How did you know about our quirks? Someone gave us a list. Their interrogation was interrupted by the PA system coming to life. More explosions rang through the air. Villains ran away from the demonic form of Bakugo as he angrily stalked the halls. Even villains whose quirks were designed for durability fell quickly to his rapid onslaught. When most men would fall in exhaustion, his frustration and anger fueled him. Momo followed behind, securing the villains with handcuffs and keeping them from being ambushed. But the guttural growl Bakugo yelled, "These assholes are small fry, I want the top dog." He blasted another villain unconscious. Gurigiri had placed Bakugo in the ruins because he had expected the hero in training to be careful with structurally weak buildings around and wouldn't put out his full power, which the huge number of durable villains could overwhelm him. Bakugo loves to disappoint and had already brought the ceiling down in a few rooms. "Do you have to be so angry?" Momo yelled over his explosion. "Do you have to be such a bitch?" He swore back at her. Huffing, she ran to catch up to him. "No, seriously, what is wrong with you? You yell, swear, and attack anything with such ferocity. I sometimes mistake you for a wild animal." Bakugo tossed the villain he was pummeling out a window. "What's wrong with me?" he asked incredulously. "What's wrong with you, princess? You get into this school, and the first day you find a boyfriend. Me liking Izuku isn't a problem," she screeched back at him. "Sure, it isn't. Did you do that at your old school? Latch onto the first person to treat you nice," he mocked. "It's not that he treats me nice, he treats everyone nice," she answered, "even people who don't deserve it." "What's that supposed to mean?" he growled back. Stepping up to her, despite her being a head taller than him. She poked him in the chest, making him growl even louder. "It means that I know your history with him." She stepped forward, "And for some reason, that very sweet boy thinks you are his friend, he vouched for you." Moving to a window, she leaned out. She could just barely make out the shapes in the courtyard. "He told me all the awful things you used to say to him, to do to him, and he thinks you are his best friend. Do you know how awful it must be when someone like you was his only friend?" He stalked up behind her. "I don't know what the problem is with that. I'm great. You're powerful, that's all you are," she glared at him, "and you use that power to bully him because his quirk wasn't as strong as yours when he got it." "No, I kept a quirkless loser from trying to do something stupid and getting himself killed." He shot back his own glare. "Izuku-kun is not quirkless," she said. Bakugo scoffed. "Before he got that book he was, and I still think he is." "What do you think that book, the one that only he can read, gives him a quirk?" She curled her eyebrows. "Yeah, of course, how else do you explain?" He paused. "Have you seen the book?" "Yes, Izuku-kun showed it Suka-chan, Kirishima-san, Tokoyami-san, and myself, because we asked." She gloated. "That book isn't normal." He spat out. "Even if you're right, we're getting off topic," she brought the conversation back. "He's a good kid who wants to help people. Apparently he believes the same about you." Bakugo brooded. "So why treat the one person who seems to not only tolerate you, but actually stand up for you when everyone else agrees on the fact that you are an asshole?" Bakugo steamed, irritated that he got stuck with one of Midoriya's girls, that he wasn't fighting and destroying more villains, that he was having this conversation at all. So he chose to respond with honesty, because it works. "Excuse me?" He couldn't do even half the stuff he does now when he first got that book. "Yeah, he mentioned that you tried to take the book away from him the first time you saw it. Did he also mention that he developed trick after trick to keep it safe and I came at him in new ways to beat them? He said he had to get better faster because of you," she accused him. "And it worked. When I got my quirk even the adults didn't challenge me, but that nerd. He never stopped. I would beat the crap out of him and he'd come back the next day to show me something he thought was cool." Bakugo's anger waned. "He never grew up, he's still the same annoying kid who followed me around at 4, talking about being the greatest hero and saving everyone." "It sounds like you respect him," she commented. "Because I do." "Then why are you so hard on him all the time?" she wanted to know. "Because it's all I know. I was the toughest, older kids heard about my quirk, so they wanted to fight me. If I was weak I lost, and I won't lose." He continued, "I don't do nice things for people, it gets you hurt, they expect things from you. Do you have to be an asshole then?" He growled at the girl. "Let me rephrase, could you try maybe being a little nicer to people? Izuku-kun thinks that being here will mellow you out and it's good for you. I'm willing to believe him, and if you start to change for the better, I'll believe you too." Grunting and snarling, he finally relented. "Fine, I'll try being nicer to people," throwing his hands up. "That's all that I ask." She walked past him. "Let's get out of here, it seems you finished your weekly chore early and took out all the trash," she said as she stabbed a villain in the head with her staff, knocking them out. Sai was with her back to Todoroki. She struggled to breathe in the heat. "See, Frog Girl can't handle the heat, little bit longer and she'll drop." The villains started laughing at this. "And then there's you, Mr. Son of the number 2. What can you do without your amazing ice quirk?" Todoroki-kun, I can't stay here, it's too hot for me to fight, Jiro. Sayu said between pain gasps. Oh, look at that, she is already begging, maybe if you were more like your father you could have saved her, but now she'll get burned up just like your face. The villain pointed a sword at the teen, who up until this point had barely acknowledged the villain surrounding him. That last comment pissed him off. No, the fire doesn't mean I can't use my quirk, he exhaled a frosty breath. I mean I don't have to wait to thaw. He slammed his fist into the ground, creating a frozen nova that engulfed the villains, the surrounding buildings, and even shattering some under the incredible temperature change. Wah, how can you? The villain started to talk. You're a freak of nature. No, I was carefully bred. He started walking past the encased villains. The boy, who half of his body was frozen, slowly turned into steam as he heated himself. Suddenly feeling a weight pressed on him, hearing a throaty and drowsy voice, if you are going to make it this cold at least share your body heat with me, Jiro. She yawned, you have to take responsibility. Todoroki smirked at the girl's actions and choice of words. He picked her up and carried her princess style, using the fire side of his quirk to keep her warm in the vast tundra he created. Midoriya followed the scream he heard, he apparently wasn't the only one. Seeing Iida sliding around because of the water, the two connected on their path. Who screamed? He asked the armored boy. Don't know, but I think it was a classmate of ours. Tenya replied, he slipped again in a puddle. You okay? Midoriya asked. I can't get any traction, which means I can't go full speed. So not really. He replied. We'll just have to think of something to get out of here and go help, Izuku said as he took in his surroundings, formulating a plan. Iida nodded. When the two boys turned the corner, they saw Uraraka backed up to a wall with quite many villains surrounding her. How are we going to get to her and help? Izuku began surveying the area until he saw that Uraraka was standing in a very large puddle. Get ready to run. We can't abandon her, Midoriya-san. He gasped in shock that a classmate would even consider that option. Trust me, he placed his hands in a puddle next to him. 3, 2, 1 He pushed his hands deeper into the water than they should have been able to go and grabbed. Bachako screamed as someone grabbed her by the ankles and pulled her down into the water only to come out wet, screaming being held by one of her classmates. Midoriya-san, that's not funny. She slapped him, dropping her in the process. Now we ran, he grabbed the girl by her wrist and took off away from the villains, who were poking at the puddle, confused about where their prey had gone. Hey, they're getting away. Iida, now realizing what was going on, caught up quickly to his classmates. As the trio ran down the street away from the enemies, I tried an exit door, Uraraka painted, they sealed those as well. So, there's no way out then, Iida. Not quite, Izuku pointed up at a skylight in the ceiling. I know your quirk is versatile, but can you really fly? Hachako asked the green-haired boy. Izuku shook his head, no, but with all our quirks, we might be able to. Not that I doubt you have a plan, but how can our 3 quirks, when combined, fly? Iida asked. Izuku whipped on his cape, Uraraka-san, I need you to grab us and make us weightless. The girl pulled both boys into a tight hug, the sudden change in weight and the high winds, catching his cape and like a parachute lifted them into the air. Haha, that's amazing, Midoriya-san. Except we are moving away from the exit. Iida chimed in. That's where you come in, use your thrusters to propel and steer us out of here, Iida-san, the boy laughed. His scarf came out of his wrist to tie the 3 of them together so that no one would fall. When Iida activated his quirk, he was surprised at how quick he could propel them without needing to contact the ground. This is incredible, in such a short amount of time you analyzed our quirks and found the optimal solution to using them to their full extent. Well done, Mr. Class President, Iida praised the boy. They rocketed towards the exit, brace yourselves. As they crashed through the skylight. Seeing the USJ from above was an amazing sight, they could see everything, the mountains, building, lake, and Central Plaza were incredible sights to see, the difference was this time. Buildings in the ruins zone were collapsing, the flames in the conflagration zone snuffed out, and the boat in the center of the lake just crashed into the shore. They angled and accelerated to the ground just as the PA system came to life. By the entrance, the students were busy fending off the attacks from the villains, trying to protect the support students and not get themselves taken out. In between laser blasts, Aoyama asked, they keep sending more to fight us, it is very difficult. Don't worry kids, I have a plan. 13 said between sucking enemies out of position for the kids to hit with their quirks. 13 aimed their finger at Kurogiri, attempting to suck in the warping villain. Just what I was waiting for, he mocked, opening a portal behind the space hero, tearing into its suit, the lights fading from its eyes. Ashido screamed when the hero hit the ground. Then a bit of hope, the PA crackled to life just above them, and Hagaker's voice started chanting, the 1st of October, the 1st of October, over and over. The 1st of what? Zero confusedly asked. The other heroes shrugged. I don't know what the date 1/10 could mean, do you guys? Kaminari questioned the support of the students. 110. Until someone shouted, that's the number for the police, she must have found a way to stop the signal jamming. Yeah, Kaminari turned on his headset and sent a strong signal straight to the school. Yo, we're being attacked at the USJ, 13 is down, over 100 villains, send help. No, you brats. Kurogiri shouted, rushing past the downed villains to grab the electric boy to stop his signal. He was himself engulfed in the strong, webbed arms of Shoji and prevented him from interfering with the boy. Unfortunately, Shoji wasn't strong enough to hold him for very long. It doesn't matter, we'll let loose our weapon and leave. Let the heroes clean up whatever is left of you brats later. Before he warped back down to the center. Shigaraki was annoyed, the PA system started broadcasting a date over and over. I don't understand it. The children have called the school, help is surely on the way now. Kurogiri, who appeared behind the hand-faced man, answered him. Stamping around in a rage, that's not fair, we were winning, now they get reinforcements. I thought we disabled items on this stage. It would seem they managed to thwart our attempts to isolate them. The shadowy man responded. Whatever, let's quit and try again later. Shigaraki said, at least we can watch some kids and a pro die. He looked over to the big-lipped boy who was tossing some villains around. Nomu, go play, start with the strong one. Show him what league he's really in. The black form strode out into the fray. We're doing great, I think we can really win this. Sato cheered. When Aizawa heard the announcement, he told the two boys what it might mean. Despite them being first years, these two are holding up pretty well in this fight. He just barely noticed the lumbering black giant approaching one of his students, Sato. The warning was just barely in time for him to dodge out of the way of the massive swipe, which instead hit 5 villains, sending them flying across the grounds. Oh, they finally sent the strong one out then. Sato goaded, downing 2 tubes of sugar from his belt, revitalizing his quirk. I feel sorry for you, I'll take you out in one punch, man. Throwing a massive haymaker straight into the giant's gut. Except it did nothing to it, Sato punched again, then again, repeatedly striking the creature with one devastating blow after another, but to no effect. Dude, what is this thing made of? He turned his gaze from the creature that seemingly ignored him before a massive hand struck the boy and cratered him into the ground. Sato-san, cried out Ijiro, jumping over a villain and trying to pry the big hand off his classmate as it further pushed him into the dirt. Shigaraki laughed, you can't beat him in strength, he was made to kill All Might. As he pointed at the two kids. Aizawa noticed the distracted man and rushed him, attempting to land a punch, only to get his arm stuck in a portal and grabbed as Shigaraki touched it, with the momentum annulled. It was simple. And this little piggy went, placing all 5 of his fingers on Aizawa's wrist. Aizawa screamed out in pain as his skin began to flake off and the muscles and nerves flared as they slowly began to decay. All the way home. Taking his pinky off the wrist, now be quiet and watch what happens next. He turned his gaze back to his monster. Kurogiri walked over to Aizawa, and if you try to nullify my quirk while your arm is in it, well, you'll be able to buy gloves half off. Understand? Aizawa understood, he put himself in a bad position and now had to watch as the two boys struggled to get the monster off one of them. Ijiro was pulling and tugging at the large arm, to no avail. It was just too strong, even with Sato pushing against it. He heard a snap and knew that one of the boy's ribs just broke. The creature smiled disgustingly at its enjoyment of causing pain. He instead changed tactics, wrapping his thick muscular tail around the creature's wrist. Sato on 3, shift your weight to your left, we are going to try a 2-person front wrist throw. Normally who wouldn't dream of speaking of his plans with the enemy right in front of him, but he got the impression that whatever this thing was, didn't think for itself. 1. Sato, pressed against a beast. 2. Ijiro tightened his grip. 3. Both boys shifted. Sato pushed forward and rolled to his left. Ijiro pulled down, twisting his tail. Using the creature's massive weight against it, they flipped the assailant onto the ground, freeing Sato, who was clutching his side in pain. Ijiro pulled Sato out of the ground and backed up, giving themselves some space to work with. It seemed strong, not smart or fast. Aizawa smirked at Shigaraki, see, your All Might killer just got tossed by 2 teenagers. Shigaraki wasn't even slightly annoyed, he was filled with glee that the kids would put up more of a fight than they had been. What would be the point if they overleveled their party? It wouldn't be fun. Just watch, the young man cackled. The Nomu stared at its obviously broken wrist, its quirk at shock absorption would do nothing for the force applied from a twisting motion. See, we can beat this thing, just have to use its strength against it. Ijiro caught his breath. The Nomu gripped his wrist and began pulling until his hand ripped clean off. Dude, what the shit, Sato cried out. Aizawa was stunned that this thing just dismembered itself. Then its flesh bubbled and a new hand formed in seconds, and now you see its second quirk, super regeneration, even if you cut it to pieces it will still regrow. Shigaraki laughed. Izawa knew this was bad. If it was strong, could take a punch, and even regenerate from serious wounds. It was not something that these kids could beat, and they might be right, it could seriously hurt the number one. The Nomu moved faster than the two boys were ready for. It slammed a backhanded fist into Ejiro, who was sent with a splash into the lake just as the boat crashed nearby, two figures jumping over the side. Sato put up a guard as the creature sent him flying high into the air, only to get caught by the trio as they directed their movement to intercept his fall. When Kirishima hopped out into the water with a splash, he saw Ejiro lying by the edge in pain, quickly picking him up. Hatsum, taking him back to the others, he passed his downed classmate to his new friend. "What are you going to do then?" she asked, worried for everyone's safety. "I'm going to keep that thing," pointing at the Nomu, busy until help arrives. "Not going to freeze at the sight of the big bad monsters anymore." As he hardened himself rushing into center field. When the now 4 teenagers landed, Izuku handed Sato to Iida. "Here, you two go back to the entrance and see if they need help." "What, we should all go?" Uraraka stammered out. "No, Iida-san's the fastest, and Sato-san needs help now," he retorted. Midoriya-san then asked, "What are you going to do?" Iida asked. He knew Sato needed help but was still concerned for his classmate's safety. Izuku pointed at Nomu, who was watching them with cold dead eyes. "I'm going to fight that." "Are you crazy? That thing is super strong and dangerous," Uraraka tried to reason with him. "I trained with All Might, nobody is stronger than him, I just need to buy time for backup to arrive." Midoriya spouted off before running into center field. Iida grabbed Uraraka by the wrist. "Come on, let's go. If you can't be serious, we're leaving him," Uraraka shouted. "I don't want to, but he has sound reasoning, besides Izawa-sensei, and 13, he's the only one before today with experience fighting villains, and has been training with All Might, so he might know what he's doing." But that Uraraka let herself get picked up by Iida, since she nullified gravity on Sato, Iida was really only carrying her weight. "Be careful, Midoriya-san," she cried out after the boy who was running head-on into the fight. "Well, now I guess it's your turn, Eraserhead," Shigaraki said. "Think you can last longer against our weapon than your two students?" He was prepared to let go of the pro hero's wrist when he heard a voice. "Hey ugly, over here." The three people turned their attention to a small child who was standing up to the Nomu. "Midoriya-san, don't," Aizawa shouted over to the boy. "Oh ho, the magic kid." Shigaraki's grin widened. I bet he didn't even last 10 seconds. "Nomu," Shigaraki spoke to his pet, Squash, this one a wizard. "I'm a magician," Izuku snarked back, pointing to the Nomu, "and it's showtime." The large beast gave a guttural roar and lunged at the small child with its fist cocked back. The boy smirked and whipped his cape in front of him, holding it taut in his hands. Shigaraki grinned fiercely as he watched Nomu throw a punch. Instead of the boy being flattened by the creation's immense strength, the Nomu seemed to bounce off the fabric, rocketing back to land in a pile of dirt, gouging the ground a few meters, before stopping next to Shigaraki, who stopped grinning. "And for my next trick," as the boy pulled a dozen decks of cards from his sleeves, "I'm going to cut you to pieces." As he waved the cards in more intricate patterns, swirling before they spun around him in a swirling vortex. "Nomu," Shigaraki snarled, "kill him." He screamed. Aizawa watched the beast flip off the ground and rushed the boy at speeds he was barely able to keep up with, yet Midoriya easily sidestepped the rushing monster and flung dozens of cards at the back of the monster, carving deep lacerations into its flesh, despite the wounds healing almost instantly. The beast turned sharply on its heel, its bulk and speed snapping its ankle as it did so, the super regeneration kicking in a second later to mend it. Izuku pulled out his wand and extending his hand as high as he could, let go as the plastic stick remained in the air. Now what happens when this thing runs into something that doesn't move? As the mindless monster rushed the child again, Izuku stepped back and to the side like a bullfighter as the Nomu clotheslined itself on the stick, which didn't even budge at the force applied to it. The beast's neck snapped back with a sickening crunch. It crashed into the ground with a force that shook the ground. Izuku bowed to his audience of 3, Aizawa smirked, "So still thinking your weapon can beat All Might, it can't stand up to that kid." He taunted the villains. Shigaraki snarled and reapplied his grip to the teacher for a moment, causing him pain. "He just needs a little help, Kurogiri, to slow the boy down." While Izuku had been stalling with the beast, he didn't notice that his foot got stuck in a black portal. The stumble was enough to allow Nomu to grab Izuku. In a panic, Izuku grabbed the brim of his hat and pulled down, engulfing himself, moments before Nomu crushed it flat. Shigaraki and Kurogiri stared with wide eyes. "Where did the boy go?" the warping quirk user asked the teacher. The loud splash drew their attention as Izuku pulled himself out of the lake, hacking up water as he dragged himself to shore. "Oh man, that was close." He spit more water out. "I almost didn't get out fast enough." He began twisting his cape to squish the water out of it. "How?" Shigaraki demanded of his captive. You already know, as always smirked, the boy's magic. He laughed. Nomu, he called out to his monster. The boy is soaking wet, be a good neighbor, and wring him dry. Izuku was still taking stock of himself when he saw the beast run at him. He wasn't ready to get back into the fight yet. When he heard a shout. Hey dude, over here. Before a rocky fist connected with the beast's eye, briefly stunning the creature, before its regeneration kicked in to mend the wound. Kirishima kept up a barrage of punches using his hardened fists, which in this state had sharp edges leaving deep gouges in the creature's flesh. Dude, Kirishima spoke back. That was amazing, now let me help you. Kirishima grinned back. Alright, Izuku nodded, reaching into his wrist for his endless kerchief. You distract him, I'll tie him up. It's your show, man. Kirishima blocked a solid backhand from the Nomu, sending him sliding back a few feet. Man, this dude packs a serious punch. But I can take it. Shigaraki screeched, now it's 2-on-1, this isn't fair. They're cheating. Unknowingly letting go of Izawa's hand who kicked off the ground backwards. Hey, get back here. I guess I'll have to fight these two, so they don't interfere with the teens fighting that monster. One slips up, and it's game over. As much as he didn't want to leave the boys alone to fight something like that, he knew that if Kurogiri and Shigaraki were able to start opening warps and grabbing the boys, they wouldn't last 1 second against that thing. No, we'll have our own 2-on-1, that makes it fair, right? He bantered back to the villains. Activating his quirk and throwing a kick at Kurogiri, who had to stumble back to avoid it. Kirishima rushed back forward to keep himself between Nomu and the young magician. He took a rain blow after blow when Izuku shouted. Now. Knowing to dodge out of the way, a rainbow of tied handkerchiefs draped themselves on the creature like party streamers. Izuku yelled as he pulled tight on his end of the scarves, which then squeezed themselves to the form of the black beast, pinning its arms to its side. Its sudden lack of balance made it fall to the ground, and just like that, we wrangled one villain. Kirishima walked over to Izuku with his hand held high. Dude, that was manly as shit, getting a solid high five from Midoriya. How did you know that would work? Izuku sniffled and rubbed his neck. I got All Might in that once, it took him a minute to get out though. Kirishima laughed. Oh man, you are going to have to share some of those stories about training with him, they sound fun. Izuku thought back, yeah it was fun, I'll tell you about the time he threw me in the ocean. Hearing snapping sounds nearby, later though, it looks like he wants an encore. Kirishima looked to where Izuku was pointing. Oh man, this is so not cool. Hardening himself once again for round 2. Nomu, go berserk and kill them already. Shigaraki ordered the creature before throwing a punch back at the teacher, whose normal state would be too much for both villains, but tearing through so much of his arm's tissue meant his punches were slower. And he was more guarded not to get caught in a portal when he wasn't nullifying their quirks. Thanks for watching this video. Part 4 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.